So the alpha for the World of Warcraft The War Within expansion has started. This means that there's tons of developer interviews and ridiculous amounts of new information being released. And I think some of the biggest changes we're seeing to the game actually has to revolve around alts, through leveling up different alts and gearing up different alts. And there's actually been a ton of changes and a ton of additional changes being teased for the future. Now, a good chunk of this obviously being tied to the new Warband system, but some of this information isn't actually specific to that, and I wanted to focus this video specifically around leveling up alts and gearing up alts, because there's so many changes coming. The leveling up new alts and gearing them is going to be completely different going into the War Within. And I think some of the most important parts of this are based around leveling up new characters, and the first bit of this being a massive reduction in the experience you need getting up to level 70. And the TLDR of these experience changes is that it's a 20% reduction in experience needed from level 20 to 50. It's a 20 to 40% reduction from level 50 to 60. And it's around a 75 to 80% reduction in experience needed going from level 60 to 70. So this is just massive reductions in experience needed to actually level up. And I'll link all of these Wowhead posts going over this information. They actually have a full chart going over all of these changes. And going from level 1 to 10 doesn't have a lot of changes. It's actually slightly longer in an overall 3% increase in the amount of time to get from level 1 to 10. But after level 10, it's just massive reductions in the amount of experience needed, getting up to, as mentioned, an 80% reduction in the experience needed once you're at those higher levels. Now that's going up to level 70. Obviously, once you get into the War Within and go from 70 to 80, the experience will be more of what you would expect from a new expansion, but this is going to make a massive difference in leveling up alts, because also the biggest changes are coming to the levels that generally take the longest. So just based off of these changes alone, which these aren't the only changes, you're going to be able to get alts into the War Within much faster than you've ever been able to. But that's not all when it comes to leveling up alts, because we have another change that I don't think it's being talked about enough and is easily one of my favorite changes coming to alt leveling. And this is an account-wide experience increase based off of achievements from getting characters to level 80. So once you get your first character to level 80, you're going to get an achievement that gives all of your other characters a 5% increase to experience earned. That's all characters from level 1 up to 80, and you can get 5 of these achievements. So there's an achievement to get 2 characters to 80, 3 to 80, 4 to 80, then 5 to 80. And the experience buff stacks. So once you have 5 characters at level 80, once the War Within launches, every other character on your account is going to be getting a 25% increase to total experience gains. And when you combine this with the massive reductions in experience needed to get up to level 70, you will be leveling incredibly quickly, especially going up to 70, but also going from 70 to 80, you'll also still be getting this massive boost in experience gains. But as this is retail World of Warcraft, getting your character up to level 80 is just the start of the game, because most of retail World of Warcraft takes part in the end game. After you've hit level 80, then you can start to do all of the end game systems. But there's also going to be a massive change in leveling characters once you get them to 80 and start pushing them more and more into the end game and start gearing them up so you can do the harder and harder content. And this is going to be more specifically tied to your warband. This is going to be Warband Bound gear. And this is something I am very excited for, as I'm somebody that plays a lot of different alts. And one of my favorite things in World of Warcraft is getting a new alt to max level and then starting to gear them up, but getting them to a point where you can actually start at least doing like normal or heroic raids and getting them into the mid mythic plus range where you can just start doing the more difficult and more interesting content. And this Warband Bound gear is going to help with that substantially. And this Warband gear is kind of gonna be hand-me-downs. So let's say you get your main character up to level 80 and you start raiding and doing Mythic Plus and gearing up that main character. Well, the entirety of the time you're doing this, and pretty much any endgame content or any content that can give you gear drops in the endgame, now will just have an additional chance to give you a personal loot piece of Warband Bound gear. Now, Warband Bound gear is always going to be a lower item level compared to the content you're currently doing. Now, we don't know the exacts about this, but let's say, for instance, you're doing a Mythic plus 10 dungeon. Maybe you'll get like a Mythic 2 or a Mythic 5 item level piece of gear. And again, we don't have any specifics on what item levels the Warband Bound gear will be dropping it, but it's not going to be dropping the same eye level gear as the content you're doing. It's always going to be lower, which again fits into it being a kind of hand-me-down gear system. And this Warband Bound gear is as it sounds. You can trade it to any character in your warband, but when they equip that item, it's now bound to them and you can't go and trade that gear to anybody else. But this is going to be a substantial new system in leveling up alts, because anytime you're playing any max level character doing any content, you're just always having chances to get gear for other characters. And with the information we have, it sounds like this gear is going to increase as you do more and more difficult content. So even though it's not at the eye level of content you're doing, it's still going to go up as you go up in content. So let's say your main character is super geared, you're doing all max out mythic pluses, you're doing heroic or mythic rating, you're going to be getting what's probably pretty decent gear for a new alt, which will probably allow you to get into some mid-tier gear very quickly on new characters. And it also sounds like you're going to be getting at least some amount of interesting gear. We don't know if this is all going to be specific gear that you can only get as warband gear, or if you're just going to be getting like lower item level pieces of the gear you could be getting. Because when talking about this, some of the developers did also mention that you could get a really interesting piece of gear for one of your alts that would make you want to go play that alt and start gearing it up more. So there's probably going to be the ability to get some pretty interesting, let's say, weapons or trinkets. Now, just based off of that, I'm already super excited for this system, but we've actually gotten some additional information through some of the content creators that were able to do some of these behind the scenes Q&A. And if you haven't heard about this, a lot of the content creators were able to play the alpha a few days before all of this was officially revealed. So they got to play it and they got to do some behind the scenes interviews with developers and some group Q&As with developers, not stuff that they would be like releasing on YouTube or anything, but just some kind of general information. And one thing that I've heard multiple content creators talk about is that specifically when talking about Warband Bound gear is that it sounds like the developers also want to add some type of currency and vendor system to the Warband Bound gear system. So it sounds like they're also trying to expand this hand-me-down gear to also allow you to earn currency to spend at a vendor to also buy more Warband Bound gear for your alt. So maybe at some future update in the system, or maybe even at launch, any content you're doing with your main, you're getting some currency that you then go spend at a vendor that just allows you to choose gear of certain eye levels that's Warbound specific gear that you can go trade to your alt. So maybe if you've been grinding away on your main, you have a ton of this currency, you could go buy like a full set of gear for one of your alts. And now that alt is just fully geared to start some mid-tier content. And all of this information just leads to one thing, that gearing up alts is going to be completely different in the War Within, and in my opinion is going to be substantially better. So if you're somebody that loves playing a ton of different alts, you're not only going to be able to level up much quicker in the War Within, you're also going to be able to gear up those alts much more quickly as well. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.